This session is titled Analyzing Propaganda and Teaching Media Literacy, the Holocaust as a Case Study. And the presenter today is Ms. Kim Klett, and she will be your presenter for today. She is asking, sorry, I was going to mention that she is asking if you have not attended any of her sessions yet today. She has a sign-in sheet that is separate from the Teaching and Learning Conference attendance.
Yeah, and there it is again in case you need it. Great. So those of you who have been with me earlier today, we're looking at some of Echoes and Reflections specialty programs, and this is one of them. And I was telling Carol that this is definitely our most popular. I think we've been doing this one for a couple of years now, and it's the one that I get the most requests for. So I think you'll really like it. It has some great things with it. And we're going to be a lot on the PowerPoint. And if you want to take pictures of any of the PowerPoints or a screenshot from your computer, a lot of the stuff that's on this one is not on the website. So just a word of warning, if you want pictures of anything, make sure you get those. All right. So my name's Kim Klett. I'm a senior facilitator with Echoes and Reflections. I teach English in Mesa, Arizona. I teach a year-long Holocaust literature and genocide studies course. I'm also a teacher ambassador for Defiant Requiem that will come up later in the program, which is why I mentioned it. And I'm a museum teacher fellow with the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. And one more time, I'll say it because the more people just joined. If you have not attended a session with me yet today, there is a sign-in sheet. Please do that. And could you guys do me a favor? If you have not attended a session with me today, will you just write the word new in the chat box and send it to me? So I just want to there's one activity that I've already done. Okay, great. We're going to do it then because there are a lot of you that are new. Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to start by looking at some images. Oops. There we go. Let me go back to this. Let me tell you about Echoes and Reflections first. For those of you who haven't attended a session yet, Echoes and Reflections has been around since 2005. Okay, this one must be the most recent because it has the highest number. 120,000 educators across the country have been educated from us. We work with a lot of teachers in every state in the US, and we support middle and high school teachers. If you're interested in doing programming with us, please reach out. We do online like this today. We do in person. We do it with districts. We do trainings with regions, with cities, all different kinds of things. So we want to make it work for your needs. All right, so let's get to work here. We are going to be looking at some images. And if you just want to put in the chat box, like, what do you notice about the picture? Or you can unmute yourselves. Does anything stand out? What's going on? Just a few words. What's going on here? Or what do you notice? Any thoughts on that? Oh, okay, yeah, Nathan, hush, hush then. Yeah, an image from the 30s or 40s. You could maybe tell by the clothes. Yeah, the buildings are kind of nice. It looks pretty clean, right? No cars, good. Everybody's walking. I love that this guy's reading a book while he walks. Yeah, it looks like it's warm weather. The kids have shorts on. This person, yeah, they have shorts too. Yeah, not crowded. Good. Okay, we're going to continue with another photo. What's happening here in this room? Yeah, they're sewing. We know it's some kind of clothing because you have a dressmaker's form over here. Other thoughts on this one? Yeah, some kind of factory. You have a lot of, it's all women working in here. There's a male, looks like maybe a supervisor of some kind. There are open windows, so it's not horrible. I mean, it's kind of crowded, but it doesn't look horrible. They're dressed, in clothes of the time, I suppose we could say. Okay, let's look at the next one. What's this woman doing? Yeah, pottery, making ceramics. We can see other things that have been made. She's working on the wheel. Again, you can see there's some sunlight in the room, right? There's some shadows. Okay. Can you tell what's going on up here at the front of this room? Yep, an orchestra. And so these are people who are listening. Again, you can see maybe they're a little dressed up for it, and they're watching the performance. The next picture is a close-up of some of the people. You can see there are flowers on the table. They look very serious. Might be kind of somber music. Any ideas what they're doing here? My students never get this one when I do this activity with them. Somebody guessed like a court. Yeah, it kind of looks like something like that, doesn't it? Yeah, it's a lecture. It's a lecture. Yeah, presentation. They're listening, they're interested. You can tell it's standing room only, right? There are so many people there, but yeah, people seem like they're really intently listening to it. This one's easy, soccer game, football, okay? And again, you can see there are a lot of people observing. You've got people on these balconies, you've got, people down here on the sidelines. Here we have a nice day, probably summer. He and the kid back here have their shirts off. They're by water, but it looks like there's a garden here as well, right? Here's another guy reading. Again, by his clothes, it looks like it's probably summer. Having some leisure time, right? Library. So this guy looks like he's working there, maybe restacking some books here. These guys are talking about a book. Dinner, family, right? Sitting together. Everybody has some food, looks like maybe some soup in the middle or something. Okay, this one, you might notice something that tells you something's a little bit different. The women are knitting, but what else makes it maybe different from the others that we saw? Oh, no worries, Meredith. Yeah, so this is a hobby, right? But what do you notice about, yeah, so Shauna said like a basement or an attic. They're actually in a barrack, right? And these are the other women on the other side. They're chatting, it looks like they're having a nice time. Looks like they're kind of a Mona Lisa smile here, right? But they're knitting and yeah, just talking. And then here's some women, again, just kind of hanging out, dressed kind of casually. Again, probably summer by the weather. So the pictures that we just looked at come from a camp in what's now the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia at the time, called Theresienstadt. And I'm going to tell you just a little bit about the camp. Starting in June of 1942, Nazi Germany deported Jewish Germans and Austrians to the camp. It was a camp and a ghetto. They called it Theresienstadt because that's the German version of the word in Czech, which is Terezín. So I usually refer to it as Terezín. I just use the Czech name for it. They initially were targeting older adults, like those 65 and older, and then also World War I veterans who had been disabled because of the war. They also brought in some people who were considered prominent citizens, so artists, musicians, other cultural figures like that. So at this point, you have to remember they were saying that they were sending the Jews east for work. Well, that doesn't make sense if you're sending old people and disabled veterans. So what they started doing is promoting Terezín as a spa town. If any of you use the graphic novel Mouse, I just finished teaching it in one of my classes, and they actually talk about it. The grandparents get sent to it. And so at this point, there are a lot of people there. They, again, are thinking that they're being sent to safety, that it's kind of like an old folks community or something along those lines. Then other Jews start getting deported there as well, including those from Denmark. And so in October of 1943, Danish leaders insisted that the Danish Red Cross visit the camp. They wanted to gather firsthand testimonies and make sure that they were being treated properly. And so the Nazis did authorize a visit from the International Red Cross and the Danish Red Cross for June 23rd, 1944. So when the Red Cross arrived, they saw this great place, kind of like in the pictures. Those pictures are not from the Red Cross visit. I'll tell you where they're from in a minute. But, they saw cafes and banks and cultural activities taking place. And so they believed that, everything must be okay. And if, again, going back to these pictures, everything seems pretty decent, if people are seeing these pictures. So the film, these come from a film. They have a timestamp on them. The film has been dubbed The Fuhrer Gives a City to the Jews. And we don't have it on the Echoes and Reflections website, but if you check out Facing History, they have it for loan if you set up an account with them, and you can see the film. I think it's about like 20, 25 minutes, something like that long. And it's, a lot of images like that. So we've heard a little bit about the perspective of, what the outsiders are seeing. What I'd like to show you next is something from our website at Echoes and Reflections. And we haven't been able to do this all day. So those of you who have been with me, you get to see something new from the website. Yay. So we are going to look at, let me get it on the right page here. Okay. So if you go to echoesandreflections.org, sorry, I'm just going to get it back. I forgot to take it back to the opening. We have several units. We have 11 units. I'm going to close a couple things here too to maybe make it go faster. Basically, when you go, this is just from one of the units, but when you go up here to the teach section, so you're at echoesandreflections.org. And again, you don't have to register. Yep. There you go. And when you go here, you're going to see the teach section. And when you open that up, oh, I still have to go back, shoot. Hang on one second, bear with me. I forgot at lunch to go back to the original page. Echoes and Reflections website is fantastic. You're going to find probably all kinds of things that you'll be able to use. So here it is, the timeline of the Holocaust. Okay, so we're going to open this up. And it will take a minute because everything's been slow. I think my internet is bad today or something. And also the timeline there's a lot of material. I'll just tell you that as well. And when it opens up, you're going to see that on the left, there are going to be dates. So just give me a minute here. Here we go. Okay, there are dates. And so you have from 33 to 45. We are going to go to 1943. And when you open up a date, you get the whole year. It also just scrolls, so you could just scroll through as well. But we want to go to the Red Cross visit. Oops, sorry, 1944. That's why it wasn't showing up. I'll show you how it keeps scrolling. There we go. So now we're in 1944 and we want June 23rd. So you click on the Red Cross visit to, they call it Theresienstadt. You have your information. When you click on the photos, it tells you a little information. There's another concert. There's an image like what we saw. Here's, and I like to share these with my students, these images. Timetable for those soccer games, right? They made a Monopoly game that was based on the ghetto. But we're going to watch this brief testimony from a man named Eric Nash who was there. And so I want you to think about those photographs that we looked at when he is telling what he saw, because they're really going to fit in with what you saw in the film. Okay, so here we go. Maybe.
And then something happened. This miserable, stinking, hungry, dysentery-plagued place overnight was built up to be a beautiful town. They started to make a park with a gazebo in it, and in this gazebo was a music band playing music in the afternoon. People were strolling in the park, dressed much better. There were a street with a coffee house. There was no coffee, but there was a coffee house. There was a bank. There was no money, but there was a bank with stores. And there were little playgrounds for children. There was a soccer field. I mean, things that was unbelievable. And we knew this is all phony and baloney because our life didn't become, our rations didn't become bigger. But we knew what it was all about because we were told there will be a movie crew to come in to film for the outside world what a wonderful gift Hitler gave to the Jews, that he gave them a town which is more or less like a retirement place. By the way, the Germans that came with transports were under the opinion that they came to a retirement place. They were told in Germany, they were given the order to pay, I don't know how many thousands of marks, because it is for their retirement in Theresienstadt, and that they will have their apartment and they have their cleaning crew, and everything was promised to them. For them, that was quite a shock when they saw what they came into. So this crew of the Red Cross came from Denmark and filmed these Potemkin villages. It was just a facade, and it took them a week to make this movie. And we had to parade in front of the bank and the coffee house, and we had to listen to the concerts. And then they were finished with their work. it was quite obvious that they don't believe what they saw. But they went, and in this moment, all of Theresienstadt crumbled and was destroyed. Because from this moment on, every day, transport after transport left, and Theresienstadt was emptied out.
And he says that because that's exactly what happened. They started deportations almost immediately after the filming and sent people to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where most of them, of course, perished. So think about, if you were to use that video with your students, that testimony, how he challenges what we saw, in the film or in the still shots that we saw of that. The IRC, the International Red Cross, did give its blessing in the end. And like we said, the Nazis continued until May 7th of 1945, when the war was over. I want to put in the chat box too, and then we'll switch back to our PowerPoint. I mentioned earlier that this program, there is a really good film about Terezin called Defiant Requiem. It's a documentary, and it looks specifically at musicians who were at Terezin, who fought back through their music. They played some specific music, including Verdi's Requiem, that really kind of in their own way got back at the Nazis. In the end, many of them were killed. There were some survivors, but it's an incredible story about spiritual resistance. So definitely check that out. All right, so let's go back. Oh, sorry, I want to grab the comment. Yes, exactly. And that's why I love when he says, like, there was a bank, but there was no money. There was a coffee house, there was no coffee, right? It really, I just love the way he challenges everything that we saw. Exactly. So we will be coming back to Terezin later in the session, but I want to move on to a couple of other things. And one of those is just to look at our agenda for our short time together today. We want to explore sound pedagogy for planning and implementing Holocaust education in the classroom, enhance your personal knowledge about the Holocaust, especially with the use and impact of Nazi propaganda. We'll be looking at Echoes and Reflections multimedia assets, including like what you just saw with the visual history testimonies and other primary resources and materials. We'll examine propaganda using media literacy skills, identify opportunities to connect the lessons of the Holocaust with more current examples of hate propaganda, and build confidence and capacity to teach about propaganda using media literacy skills. So those are our goals. As always, Echoes and Reflections builds all of their lessons and units on these pedagogical principles. So defining terms, examining anti-Semitism, providing historical context, using those primary sources, and teaching the human story. And we also want to consider, how do we make the Holocaust relevant, encourage critical thinking, ensure a supportive learning environment, and foster empathy. So just kind of keep those in mind. All of our lessons do that, but think about how you play that, how that plays out in your classroom as well. All right, so let's just jump into the definition of propaganda. So this is one working definition. There are lots of them out there. You could use something that you prefer. But when we look at this, I want to break it down a little bit. So we have false or partly false information. So remember that propaganda includes half-truths. It could be lies. It's aiming to deceive, right? It's intended to shape people's opinions and actions. So part of the goal is to influence what and how people think about issues, like their beliefs, right? And then take action based on those attitudes. And then that last part about fulfills the propagandist's intent. Remember that the ultimate goal of propaganda is not information sharing for mutual understanding, but it's a specific way of believing and acting to achieve the propagandist's goals, right? It's to achieve their intent. regardless of what the audience might need. So this is all about acceptance of the ideology itself and totally bypassing critical thinking. So keeping that in mind, remember too that it's not the same as persuasion. It is not the same as brainwashing or mind control. Sometimes my students want to go there, and so I show them what the true definition of brainwashing is, and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, no, that isn't it. So these are 4 techniques. Echoes and Reflections is pulled from, there's so many media literacy groups out there now, and so we've pulled from a few of them for this presentation. This one comes from Mind Over Media, and they look at 4 techniques of propaganda. So activating strong emotion, oftentimes that could be fear, right? It appeals to audience needs and values. That could be like the bandwagon technique. It simplifies information. That means it also could omit, right? We always have to remember that it could omit information. And then attacks opponents. So it could be scapegoating, it could be name calling, right? It could be any variety of things. And so just for one example from the Holocaust, from right before 1932, this is our last hope, Hitler. We've got the bandwagon, right? We've got just average people, men, couple women, child, but what else are they? And yes, Meredith, just saw your comment. Yep. I wasn't going to go there, but I'll let you do that. What do you notice about these people? Yeah, working class, right? Average. There are a couple women, but yeah, mostly men, which would, for that time be the working class, right? But yeah, they're downtrodden, right? They're probably sick of, I just saw from Corinne, gaunt and forlorn. Yeah, because that's exactly the message. Hitler will get us out of this. Remember, this is right during the Depression. And so it's hard times worldwide, and people are suffering, right? So, this is our last hope with Hitler, right? So that's just one example. There are many others. The Holocaust Museum several years ago had a whole temporary exhibit on propaganda, and it's still online. It has excellent examples like these. So if you ever want to, check them out, definitely check that website. Okay, so I'm going to take you to the website again. And those of you who were with me in a couple of the sessions today, we have already looked at this, so I apologize, but we do have some folks that are new to the segment. So we're just going back to where we were before. We're going to get out of the timeline though. Slowly but surely. And we are going to go again in that teach column. We want to go this time to the lesson plans. That's the area you'll go to the most when you're using this website. And they're really units, not lesson plans. Whoops, still waiting. Let's try. Okay, and so we want to go to the unit called anti-Semitism. There are 11 units in total. They say lesson plans, they're units. And again, I'm sorry, some of you, this is a fourth time hearing it, I apologize. These units are all set up the same, where you have a quote from one of the testimonies. You have keywords that are specific to that unit. You have a video toolbox. It's a 15-minute video that gives you teacher background. So they're not really meant to use in the classroom. You have your academic standards for social studies and English, and it breaks it down for each lesson. You have your essential questions and your objectives. And I've been telling the folks in my sessions that this is where it's really practical. So if you're a brand new teacher or you're new to teaching about the Holocaust, you have everything you need in these units. If you're like me, I've been teaching 31 years. I pick and choose things, right, from the different areas. And that could look different every year. Some I go back to all the time, and some I try, and if it works, great, and maybe I want to try something different. So anyway, I wanted to take you to a specific unit or lesson within this unit, sorry, that looks at youth, because the Nazis were really good at gearing propaganda toward the youth, right? Whoops, I went too far. There it is. And so, like many political groups or any group, you want to get people when they're young and get them involved, and you get their loyalty oftentimes with that. They wanted the young men, of course, to join the military. They needed those young men, but they also indoctrinated children through school and also through examples like this particular book that was geared toward children that came out in 1938. And actually, for those of you who have seen this already today, I'm going to make a connection to something new and different in a little bit. So hang on, I promise there's new stuff. But this was a book called The Poisonous Mushroom that was very popular in 1938 and beyond. That was geared toward children. It had stories, it picked up on the features that they thought were true to Jewish people: the big nose, the dark hair, red beard, probably trying to tie him to communism. You get the Star of David, just in case you didn't recognize it. Oh, good. Cheryl talked about it too. Good. Okay, perfect. So if you were in Cheryl's session, yeah, some overlap. So I'll kind of, just quickly mention that underneath you have the descriptors that tells you like what the caption would say. Each of these is based on a story. You can look up the stories online. There's actually a site that collects them all, and you can read all of the stories. This one, my kids always say stranger danger. Again, trying to portray Jewish men as lascivious and perverted. This one, more propaganda about like what a good German family looks like. They're blonde. They're hardworking, right? The woman's been out in the fields with the children. She has a lot of children. They're barefoot. The kids are, they're not wealthy again. They're just normal people, right? But they're also looking at the cross and reminding themselves that the Jews did this, right? Is the implication there. And then this last one, teaching them how to draw caricatures of Jews and how the nose is like a backwards number 6. So my students love looking at these. I use this activity every year, and I put them into groups and have them analyze the pictures, and I take off the captions, right? So they just know it's something with anti-Semitism, but they don't necessarily know the whole connection, okay? So I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint and show you, this is where it connects from what we just saw. Okay, there we go. So there was that image. And so these are some of the questions that you could ask, again, if you wanted to look at those poisonous mushroom pictures and think about, the techniques. We know this is propaganda, so what techniques are used? What lifestyles, values, and points of view are represented? How might different people interpret the message? What's omitted from the message? And just kind of getting them to think further about that. My students really started thinking about like what they saw as children, and we're trying to make some interesting connections as well. They didn't have anything, that was quite on the order of this, but they were thinking for sure. Okay, so this is where I'm going to make a connection. This is a newspaper called Der Stürmer, and Der Stürmer translates to the attacker, all right? This was a weekly newspaper. It was founded by Julius Streicher. Julius Streicher also published that book that we just saw, The Poisonous Mushroom. It was, the newspaper was edited by a man named Ernst Heimer. He wrote The Poisonous Mushroom, right? So they were doing propaganda for adults and propaganda for children. They were working on all of this. When Hitler comes into power in 1933, this particular newspaper had been out for quite a while. They had about 25,000 followers of the newspaper. By 1938, they were selling 500,000 copies a week. And it had easy to read articles, very low level reading, right? So everybody could understand it, and very hostile. They also featured, as you can see here, and I'll show you some close-ups of these in a minute, but they featured these illustrations every week that were very anti-Semitic. And the man who drew them, his nickname was Phipps. Well, guess what? He also illustrated The Poisonous Mushroom. So all kinds of connections to that. These are actually propaganda pictures, though, about Der Stürmer. So, they're trying to show, again, even children can read it. Everybody reads it. Here it is, like on a kind of a kiosk, kind of display case where people can access it even if they can't buy it, right? This next picture, same thing. You can get it anywhere. You can get it on the train. On your way to work, you can read it. Look at all these boxes of it. Lots of people are buying it, right? So these are propaganda pictures for that newspaper. These are just some headlines. If we had more time, we'd go into more detail with them, but I just wanted you to kind of get the idea of what they were publishing and the kinds of, again, playing on those images of the Jews. And this was, every time. Here's the caption: the Jew wants the war, the people do not. The people bleed and the Jews are victorious. Right? This was their most popular issue. I use this image when I teach historical anti-Semitism in my class. This goes back to the idea of ritual murder or blood libel, where they said that Jewish people killed Christian children to get their blood to use it in, ceremonies and such. And it's a horrible picture. I mean, it's like, and this came from a church, actually. Phipps did not draw this. This was a much older picture. But here, dead babies on the ground, and they've got a knife at this child, and they're collecting the blood in a bucket. I mean, it's really gruesome. But people bought into this, right? People believed this. This was after Kristallnacht, with the man who, Ernst von Roth, the man who was killed by the Jewish young man, Herschel Greenspan. And so again, Jewish statism will triumph, right? These are the kinds of headlines that people were seeing. And again, people, including children, on the website in the anti-Semitism unit, there's a testimony by a woman named Esther Clifford. And she talks about being a teenager and having to walk by these, newspapers that were on display, like you saw in the earlier picture, and how she got to school and she felt like she couldn't learn, that she just felt like she was so traumatized by what she was seeing. So as Joseph Goebbels wrote, if you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. The lie can be maintained only for such a time as the state can shield the people from the political, economic, and or military consequences of the life. And he continued, it thus becomes vitally important for the state to use all of its powers to repress dissent. For the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie, and thus by extension, the truth is the greatest enemy of the state. Yeah, that was true in Nazi Germany, right? And he was the minister of propaganda and unfortunately did a really good job at it. Okay, so I told you we would come back to Terezin. I mentioned that there were a lot of artists at the camp. I just visited Terezin for the second time this past summer, and they have even more art on display in the museum there. And it's so interesting to see this interpretation. This is by Bedřich Frita, is the author's name, and this is the title of the drawing, Facades for the International Commission, 1943 and 1944. So what do you notice that wasn't in those first images that we looked at of Terezin? This also complements Mr. Nash's testimony very well. What are we noticing? And you can unmute or put it in the chat either way.
It
Yes.
looks like vultures in the background. Looks like vultures in the background and the graveyard and.
Yeah. Exactly. Somebody mentioned the buildings. Yeah, the fake storefronts. Remember that not only is it called facades, but Mr. Nash used that word as well. Yeah, so you have a perfume shop, right? Some kind of workshop, blacksmith maybe. Yeah, the vultures in the background. Yeah, I love the eyes on the building, like you're being watched all the time. Okay. Somebody mentioned the bodies. It's almost like, here's the appearance and what we saw in those photographs, that's the appearance, but here's the reality. Oh, I've never heard anybody say kissing death. That's interesting. I think it also could be interpreted that life goes on, that here's this couple maybe sneaking off to the side to make out, but they're also by the prison. Here's a skeletal figure being imprisoned. There's a wall around it. You all are in Nevada. I'm in Arizona. My kids think this looks like a palm tree, right? It's not supposed to. It's supposed to look dead, like it's dead, right? Even the wagon, right? Somebody mentioned like for zoo animals. Yeah, it kind of looks like a circus kind of wagon, like a show being put on. Yeah, and I don't know, students really like looking at art, I think. And this is a great activity to use with them to get them to think about, and I use it with Mr. Nash's testimony to get them again to think about that appearance versus reality. What did those Red Cross folks see on their visit? And what was that truth, right? What was that reality? Okay. And so using that drawing, this is another technique. And this one comes from, I think it's from Adobe, if I remember right. I thought I had it written down, sorry. Anyway, it's called the SAMS technique. And so you have the students look at an image like what we just saw. So, what's the picture about? What do we see? And then who's the intended consumer of the media? That particular artist, a lot of their art was hidden away at Terezin. And so they wanted people to see it. They were hoping, they knew they probably weren't going to survive, but they wanted to make sure that other people saw it and learned the reality. So then what's the message? What's the takeaway? And then, of course, the distinct appearance. And I've done this program with the media literacy. I did it last spring and had a full day, and it was in person. It was fantastic. But with that more time, we were able to do this. So think about this for your classroom. Taking still images from Terezin, like what we looked at. I'm going to go back real quickly. Sorry, because a couple of you came on a little late. So I want to make sure everybody knows what I'm talking about. So taking these images like this, right? And you could have your students. So what we did in the program was we got into groups. Each group had one of these photos. And then they talked about, okay, how could they be like that artist and manipulate it, right? And change it to show kind of the reality of what was going on, right? And so each group had a different photograph, and thinking if they could use Photoshop with it. We didn't do that because even with the full day, we didn't have time for that. But, you could do that in the classroom and have your students manipulate those photos to kind of do, getting back to the picture, to do what Bedrick Frita did here, right? And to be able to show that reality. I've never tried that in class, but I think it would be a really cool activity to do. Okay, so before I go to our last little session here, or section here, does anybody have any questions so far that you would like to ask? And again, feel free to unmute or put in the chat box if you do. Okay, happy to answer. The website is, I'll put it in the chat box again. And like I said, I would say about half of what we're doing on the slides today is on the website, but at least half of it isn't. So I also at the end will share my email address in case you want to use something and you can't find it. I'm happy to help you find the materials. So for our last few minutes that we have together, I wanted to talk about the use of propaganda still today, where it can be used by governments and, bad people basically to perpetrate genocides. Meredith, just to answer your question real quickly, Echoes and Reflections, we partner with the U.S. Holocaust Museum, and we do have some links on our website to some of their resources, but no, for this session, I didn't go to any of theirs. Okay. So anyway, I wanted to look at two examples where governments have used propaganda to really help them carry out genocides. Oops, sorry, just saw another question. Have you found it beneficial to define the concepts? Yes, absolutely. I could see, so actually with the first pictures that I showed, I jump into those. I don't give them, like, we don't talk about propaganda before those because I just want them to look at them. Not, they know they're in a Holocaust class, but they usually don't make the connection that they're from a camp, right? I haven't done this activity yet this year. I'll get to it later, but yeah, I usually don't tell them. And then we go into our unit on propaganda. So that's how I use that one. Yeah. Okay. So when we look at the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, this was for basically 100 days in 1994. And I'm sure a lot of you know a little bit about it or a lot about it. Most of the victims, and it's anywhere from 500,000 to over 1 million that we see in the numbers, depending on which source you look at. It's a lot of people. They were killed mostly by their neighbors. It was the Tutsis being killed by the Hutus predominantly. There were also some Hutu folks who helped save their Tutsi neighbors, and some of them were killed as well. They were murdered with machetes predominantly. There was also a lot of sexual violence. There were a lot of rapes. There have been a lot of stories about the children that were born of those rapes. Lately, I've heard a lot of those. So it's a really interesting study. But where it fits in with propaganda is that they used the radio. There was a public radio. It was called Thousand Hills Free Radio and Television. It was easily accessible by everybody in Rwanda. And they would get on the radio and say really hateful things. So I'm going to read a little excerpt. There are sites where you can play, and it has the, the subtitles, because it's in Kinyarwanda, I believe is the language. It's either that or French that it's in. I think it's Kinyarwanda. But anyway, this is what they're saying. Today it's Sunday. It's 4:22 p.m. It's the 19th of June, 1994. Notice to all cockroaches listening now, and cockroaches are what they called the Tutsis. Rwanda belongs to those who really defend it. And you cockroaches are not real Rwandans. Everybody is up in arms to defeat cockroaches. From our military officers, the young people, adults, men and women. So you understand you have no way out. And it continues. And they start this little chant of cockroaches are no more. God is merciful. If we exterminate all the cockroaches, nobody will judge us because we will be the winners. So it's, again, a perfect example of how the radio, a form of media, used propaganda to help kill, because then not only did they say these horrible things, but they actually said the addresses of people on the radio and said, go kill them, and would give lists of addresses.
Kim, I don't know if you saw the question in the chat about what would be too graphic for a 13 to 14-year-old.
Thank you. Yeah, so I will tell you that for Holocaust, everything on Echoes and Reflections, they do not use any graphic images, but my students will attest to this. They're seniors in high school, and they will tell you words can be more, graphic than visuals. So I think we really have to make sure we read through it ourselves, kind of gauge our kids, what they're going through. If they're going through traumatic times, maybe not do stuff that's super duper heavy, and just kind of gauge it on that. As far as things like Rwanda, again, you need to know your group. I probably wouldn't do that with junior high kids. I do it with we have a very large unit on Rwanda in my class, but again, they're seniors. So yeah, you do have to be careful, but do know that the stuff on Echoes is meant for that age group, but I would still go through it, yourself. I wouldn't use everything on the site for sure. And I see the time is nearing toward the end, but I just want to mention the Rohingya and the genocide that's been perpetrated against them as well, also was fueled through social media in this case, where these fake things went out on Facebook. Facebook has spoken and said that, they will remove all of this, but I don't know that everything has been removed, but it definitely was used as propaganda. They were saying that the Rohingya were going to launch this jihad, warn your friends, get your weapons ready, let's unite, this kind of thing. So, again, it's a way to bring it to the present and have your students look at the propaganda that they see, on their social media or wherever they get their information.
I just wanted to remind everybody before you guys leave to fill out the attendance and the evaluation for the Teaching and Learning Conference. The attendance tracker does need to be filled out after every session. And Kim might have a second evaluation that she would like that is for her.
Yes, I'm putting that in the chat box right now. If you could do an evaluation just for this session. And I'm sorry, I went through that so fast. I don't think I've ever done it in such a short session. So I hope you were able to follow and got some good information from it. If you'd like to see more, like I said, you can request from Echoes and Reflections longer programs, online or in person. I'm also going to put my email in the chat box. If you have any questions or want resources, let me know. And when you fill out my evaluation, ADL was the sponsoring group for today's. You can put in 1 hour. And again, we were looking at media literacy.
All right, time is up for this session. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you so much, Kim, for this very wonderful presentation. And actually every session today was completely fascinating. So thank you once again. For the other attendees, the next session starts at 1:45. In this room will be World History Project, teaching world history through narratives. And thank you all for attending.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for attending.